Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to Mary J. Schalla's session. We are session 1 of stream 3 today, and I'm your moderator, Jessica. If you're looking for a different session, you will be able to find all of the sessions in the menu on the left. Click on the session tab, and then click on the session that you're interested in attending. I'm very pleased today to introduce to you the speaker for this session, Miss Mary J. Schalla. She's an author and a survivor and a domestic violence advocate. Mary J. also has become a public speaker regarding domestic violence and is bringing awareness to what it's like after fleeing abuse and also what it's like to have to fight in court. Mary J., we are so looking forward to sharing your story with you today. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about my story. I was in a relationship shortly after getting divorced in 2013 to a man that I thought I could trust and who treated me very well in the beginning of our relationship. So well, in fact, that we chose to have a child together to blend our family. I had 2 children from a previous marriage. He had 2 children from his. We had our son in November 2014, and I began to notice small differences in his behavior earlier on in the relationship, but it wasn't enough to make me go, well, that's scary behavior, or that's harming behavior, just kind of weird and just strange behavior, such as he'd introduced me to one of his friends who is female, and he wanted me to get to know her. Thought that we would get along really well. And so when I went to actually hang out at her house one day, we were watching a movie. He was constantly texting me and asking me when I was going to be home. And when I said, when the movie's done, and I came home, I got the silent treatment. I got him banging doors. I got him throwing the phone across the room and hitting the wall. And I didn't understand what I had done wrong. I learned very early on in my relationship that if I woke up from sleeping, not to move and to stay as still as possible, almost like a statue. And I literally had to control my breathing because I had a panic. I was trying not to have that panic breathing where you can hear somebody panicking. And the reason I did that was because if I didn't lay there like a statue, or he realized that I was awake, he would literally jump on top of me to have sex. As our relationship continued and more towards the end of our relationship, when I fled, I became extremely ill and was hospitalized for 45 days. I almost died of severe pancreatitis. I lost half my body weight and had an extremely hard time recovering from that. When I got home from the hospital in March of 2018, I noticed that my abuser's demeanor had completely done a 180. When I went, I noticed my abuser's demeanor had changed in such ways of paranoia. He was asking me who had been at the house and reminding me that I never opened the curtains in our bedroom, and that his ex-wife used to do that when she cheated, accusing me of cheating. He was correct. I didn't open our curtains in our bedroom, but my son was with my sister while I was recovering from this illness. And every morning she would FaceTime with me for my son and I, so that we could talk. I didn't have the energy to get out of bed. I didn't have the strength to get out of bed. I didn't have the strength to walk from my bedroom to the bathroom by myself. And so each morning when she would call and FaceTime with my son, I would open the curtains so that there would be light in a room. We had room darkening curtains, and so that he could see my face while we FaceTime. And I didn't bother to shut those curtains until I went to bed again that night. He demanded always to know who was in our home, and I would always reassure him nobody, but that didn't start at the house. I noticed that while I was at the hospital, he would constantly ask me who came to visit. And it wasn't that he didn't know that I had visitors. My ex-husband would bring my older two children to come and see me at the hospital. My mom came to visit, and he knew these people were coming to visit. There was nobody else that came to visit but him on the majority of the time I was there. But he didn't believe me. He kept going to the nurse's station, which literally there was a window and then the nurse's station from where my bed was, and asked the nurse who was there, who would come to see me that day. During the time of recovery, my body had completely deconditioned. And by deconditioned, I mean, I had no strength to stay awake. I had no strength to walk any amount of distance. If I did, my legs would be shaking beneath me. I had extreme dizziness. I had to use the aid of a walker or somebody holding me up to walk. I couldn't take in more than 300 calories a day once I left the hospital. I was on a feeding tube for quite a long time, and that's where I lost half the body weight. But I noticed other things during the time of my healing, such as obsessive behaviors of him going through my clothing, of him going through my personal items, coming home at random times of the day while he was at work to quote unquote check on me. Things he didn't do before. He said he didn't want me to go anywhere alone. He would tell me that he was coming to my doctor's appointments when he had never done that before. He said he was coming to my friends' houses, which he never did before. He would always go to the garage if my friends were over at the house because he was a chain smoker. And the very last thing I think that really I noticed with the obsessive part was, and not wanting to leave me alone, was he said, "I'm coming to your children's school function." And in 5 years that we were together, that is not something he ever did. He never once wanted to come to the school function. I asked him to come every single time. He declined every single time, saying how uncomfortable he would be there. And this particular time, I think he knew that something was going on, and he knew that I probably was, I think he thought I was going to leave at this particular time. And so he said he was going to come to this event. And I had told him I didn't want him there. I didn't want him to come because I didn't want him to ruin my children's night, because I was angry with him because he had assaulted me over and over and over. And we had had this conversation, and it was more and more and more of, don't wake me at night. Don't be touching me at night. You're being rough. You're hurting me. And so I had become frustrated. I didn't want him there. I wanted to have that time with my kids, and I didn't want to ruin their night because him and I weren't talking. And I didn't want to have my kids see that I was stressing out or emotional. So I told him I didn't want him there. My abuser had been sexually assaulting me during our 5-year relationship. He had financially abused me. He was draining me of funds. He didn't have his own bank account. He used mine. He was not signed on to my bank account. I had never shared a bank account with him, nothing like that, but he always took my debit card and used whatever funds were on there for whatever he wanted. He took my vehicle whenever he wanted. There's other things that he had done, but on April 26th of 2018, this was after the last sexual assault happened. I had a friend who recognized that I was in distress. I was scared. I was in trouble. I couldn't even talk to him. I was crying. I was shaking, and he got me out of there. My friend had put me up in a hotel that night, paying cash so that my abuser couldn't find me. The next morning after fleeing my abuser, I called him and told him that I was not coming back. I told him I could not forgive what he had done to me, and that I was scared to be around him. I informed him that we shared a 3-year-old son, and at the time that our conversations could only be about our 3-year-old son and about household items that we would be splitting up. He constantly in that conversation pleaded with me, saying he knew what he did was wrong and that he was sorry, and that if I wanted him to go get help, he would do that for me. I once again told him that I would not be returning and that our conversations had to be about our son and the household items, and I hung up. From April 27th to May 6th, my abuser messaged me every single day. He asked if we could talk on the phone so he could explain his side of things and why it happened the way it did. To me, there was no excuse for what he had done to me over those 5 years. He was asking me to forgive him, asking me to come home, telling me he would come and find me while I was at my parents' house and bring me back home, telling me how I was a bad mother. And then he would flip it and he would say, the kids are so lucky to have you as their mother. On May 6, 2018, as you can see from this slide, my abuser would not stop messaging me. This is just a few of the messages he sent in one day. He sent 110 messages in 45 minutes. He sent it through iMessage, email, and Facebook Messenger. He was asked several times to stop, but he continued. On May 8th, 2018, I applied for the Escaping Abuse benefit through Alberta Works. I told the worker what was happening, and I showed her the messages that were not stopping. I told her that I was terrified of what he would do next. I was so worked up and upset, I just wanted to be left alone. And she had instructed me to go to the courthouse once we were through with my application to get an emergency protection order. I went to the courthouse and I told the judge what had happened and was continuing to happen, and I was granted the protection order. The judge asked if I had filed a police report and said he couldn't tell me to file one, but highly recommended that I do, because what had happened to me was a very serious assault. That evening, my abuser was served the emergency protection order, and this order protected myself and my 3 children. I felt a small sense of relief that if he tried to come for me, he would be arrestable. Before fleeing my abuser, I had talked to friends about what was happening. I had asked them how to make it stop. Some of them gave me a little advice on how to make it stop, such as go lay on the couch if it's that bad, or there were other things like instead of having sex with him, try something else to get him, sorry, I don't know the right word, but to try to make this not inappropriate, but just so that he could get that pleasure and then leave me alone. I saw my doctor on April 23rd after the last sexual assault, and I told him to document it in my file. But unfortunately, my doctor didn't tell me that I should go and have a rape kit done. I don't believe he knew or that I should go and have one done. I'm not sure why he didn't tell me to go and have one done once I told him what had happened. To this day, I'm a little disappointed that that didn't happen. I stayed with my parents after fleeing in Airdrie, Alberta from April 27th to May 20th in 2018. And my mom was able to help me get an apartment by co-signing. My credit had been ruined by my abuser and I wasn't able to get one on my own. I knew I had to come back to Edmonton because I had my 2 other children and I couldn't leave them here. I needed to be able to be with my children. A few days later, I did, after moving into my apartment, I think it was May 22nd of 2018, I was able and chose to file a report with the police in regards to the sexual assaults that I had endured over the 5 years and what had happened since I left the abuse. I went to the police station in mid-June for my interview about my police report. And because there had been a couple of weeks in between that time, I had gathered new evidence of harassment from my abuser. I completed my interview and was told that they were going to arrest my abuser that day for breaching the emergency protection order. I believe it was a couple of weeks later that I got a phone call from the officer who took my report and who interviewed me, who said he would not be laying charges because my abuser's story was much different than mine. My abuser told the officer that I was mentally unwell and that I remember what happened very differently than he did. Because my abuser was not charged by the police for my allegations of sexual assault, forced confinement, and assault, I had researched night after night what I could do next. Sleep was out of the question anyways, so I did research. What came up was something called an information. I was able to take all my evidence, and that was around 400 sheets of paper, to a justice of the peace to determine if charges could be laid by me. The justice of the peace went through every single piece of paper over 2 hours and determined that I, in fact, did have enough evidence to prove I was forcibly confined, assaulted, and sexually assaulted. The justice of the peace then told the Crown prosecutor, who was sitting there during my information, that she believed I had been forcibly confined in a room with him on the night before I left, forcibly confined with him in a room the night that I was sexually assaulted, and the night before I left, he had grabbed my wrists and he refused to let me go and begged me not to leave. She told the Crown I would lay charges, or she told the Crown that she would lay the charges I asked for because there was sufficient evidence to prove that my abuser had in fact sexually assaulted me and assaulted me on numerous occasions. It just so happened that before seeing the justice of the peace, my abuser posted half-naked pictures of me publicly on social media. I was able to take those pictures and show the justice of the peace. And her exact words were, "You need to show the Crown prosecutor before you leave those pictures because that is a criminal offense." After fleeing my abuser, I knew I still had to allow him to see our son. While I stayed with my family in Airdrie, I would have our son, who was 3 at the time, FaceTime with his dad, but I would never allow my abuser to speak to me or see me in those FaceTime calls. Shortly after getting the emergency protection order, I had gotten a parenting order in place. It did allow my abuser to have visitations and 3 nights a week as per his request for FaceTime calls with our son. I asked that we do our exchanges at the police station in the police station parking lot, which I thought was safe. But at each visit, my abuser pushed the boundaries of coming near me, commenting on my looks, asking me for hugs, trying to get me to speak to him about the trial, trying to tell me I would never win in court, asking me to stop calling the police, and cornering my young son and I in the parking lot up against the wall and in between vehicles. He also threatened suicide multiple times. The abuse didn't stop there. My abuser would stalk and follow me and my children from the police station after I picked up my son from his visit with his dad. It would seem he was going on his merry way, and then all of a sudden he would end up behind me. To do this, he had to cross 3 lanes of traffic. This went on for a few months, and I truly believed that we'd end up in a car wreck because I was trying to avoid him and he couldn't stop following and intimidating and scaring me and my children. In this picture, you can see his truck. He is on the far right lane and I am in the far left. He was behind me in this picture and I had just had enough. The police kept saying, "You need to have evidence of him following." And this was shortly, it's maybe 10 blocks from the police station. I looked behind me just to ensure there's no vehicles around me coming behind me. And I literally stopped my vehicle in that road and I captured video and pictures of him driving. I had just had enough. I was tired of it. I was scared. I didn't know how to make it stop. And every time he passed me, I would get this smirk of, you can't catch me. What are you going to do? The first time I saw him drive by my apartment, my heart sunk. I was devastated that he was able to find us, and I was terrified that he would bust through our windows and come for me. I did everything I could to ensure he could find us. I didn't show outside my windows when we did FaceTime calls with our son. If we were out, I never showed buildings or surroundings. I never posted anything on social media, especially pictures. And yet one weekend, he was able to find us in another city. I was terrified the police wouldn't show up in time should he come for me. And I mentioned to every officer that I interacted with that I knew the risk was high that he would put me in a body bag, but that if that happened, to be sure that my kids didn't end up with him. To keep my kids safe. He drove by my apartment multiple times a night, posting on Facebook messages of him knowing when I had someone in my home, and assuming I had moved on. My abuser thought it would be appropriate to make a public Facebook profile page. It was something everyone could see, including my work, my family, and my friends. Every message, and it was daily, would go between love and hate, blame and I'm sorry. And when all else failed, he tried to use his kids and mine to get me to respond to him. He tried everything to get me to say something, anything at all, to him in response to his constant harassment. When I refused to respond to the unwanted messages, he went in a new direction and threatened self-harm. He would send me messages that would be his last visit with our son, that I needed to take care of our son now because there's nothing left for him here. He told me he was going to be leaving, and all I could think about was my son's safety and the possibility of him harming my son to get to me. There were times I didn't think I would ever see my son again. This particular message on this slide was a message he sent in 3 different ways. It was a suicide letter. And he had sent a suicide letter, and this was him saying, I didn't mean to send it. He sent it 3 different ways. One through iMessage, one through email, and one through, he sent a video for our son to say goodbye. In that message, he said, be good for mommy. Remember, daddy loves you. The next day, again, this is the apology message, again, in 3 different ways. And he asked me not to report it to the police. But he did, however, call the police himself to inform them that he accidentally sent that message. In August of 2018, after being warned by officers to stop harassing me or he would be arrested, he was arrested. He was charged with criminal harassment and stalking, breach of a restraining order as it changed from the emergency order to a protection order, posting intimate images online publicly without consent, and obstruction of justice. He deleted the entire Facebook profile page before going into the police station, knowing he was going to be arrested. In total, he had 8 charges. Later on, when I went to talk to the Crown, they had informed me that they were staying the charges of sexual assault, and forcible confinement. I was frustrated and I was angry. I didn't understand. I was told that it wasn't because they didn't believe it happened. Or I was told it was because they didn't believe it didn't happen. And because it was really hard to prove that a spouse had sexually assaulted another spouse. And I had no physical evidence, such as a rape kit. But the other charges did go through. So we were to go to trial. Oh, sorry. There we go. After each visit, our son would come back crying. He'd come back into my arms and he would tell me he thought he would never see me again. He told me that Daddy said to tell me that he still loved me. At one visit, my abuser took my son and had all of his curls chopped off because he knew how much I loved his hair. I never said a word. In July of 2018, my son's behavior changed, and he started making inappropriate remarks about kissing his boobies. He said his penis hurt after a weekend with his dad. He told me he was going to shove a pencil up my bum and literally tried to shove that pencil through my pants. He would tell me I didn't need to check his bum. And when I asked him if something was there bugging him, he would say, no, you just don't need to check my bum. These comments came from nowhere. Eventually, he became hysterical when he would have to go see his dad. He'd scream in the car the whole way to the police station, and that was 15 minutes driving. Please don't leave me alone with my father. He never called his dad father. He always called him daddy. He always called me mommy. So I found it strange that he would use the word father. It broke my heart, but due to the parenting order and the threat it imposes should I not take him to the visit with his father, such as being arrested for breaching the parenting order, I took him kicking and screaming. I made sure that my son's pediatrician knew what my son was saying and that it was documented. I also told him that my son was regressing and peeing the bed at night, having nightmares, and claimed that when he was at his dad's, he hid in the closet because he was scared of him. The doctor ran a bunch of tests to rule out anything medically wrong with my son that would make him say that he had a sore penis or have accidents or change his underwear frequently when there was nothing in there. After the test came back fine, my son's doctor said it was time to call Child and Family Services. Child and Family Services were called. I called a couple of times before and was told that as long as I was doing everything to protect my son, I was doing what I needed to do. And I was baffled because of the claims that my child was making. All of our children were interviewed and questioned by Child and Family Services, my 3 children and his 2. At that time, the children did not disclose anything had happened to them, but the caseworker did believe that my son was at high risk of being harmed by his father due to another investigation that was being done in 2018 in regards to historical sexual assaults of minors in Nova Scotia. The caseworker told me to go back to the courthouse immediately and obtain another emergency protection order. In September of 2018, I had gotten a call from one of the officers who had come to my home when I filed a complaint about my abuser breaching the EPO back in June of 2018. This officer informed me that there was an investigation going on in Nova Scotia in regards to my abuser and allegations of historical sexual assault of minors under the age of 14. I was terrified. After getting the emergency protection order that Child and Family Services told me to get, I was told I could not return to my home and asked if I could stay elsewhere. The judge said that my son and I would be in immediate danger when my abuser was served the papers for a second emergency protection order. I knew I couldn't afford to move again, so my children and I hopped from Airdrie to Edmonton between family and friends' homes for a couple of months, and my kids had to miss school due to our circumstances. Their world turned upside down once more. Child and Family Services concluded their investigation and closed the file. I was frustrated as getting that second EPO was dangerous for us, and they left me hanging to fend for myself and the reason I needed the order to stay in place. Thankfully, the officer who informed me of the investigation in Nova Scotia, after explaining the situation to him about having to get another emergency protection order and Child and Family Services saying they didn't need to come to court now, this officer, thank God, came to court unsubpoenaed to tell the judge that my son was not safe to be alone with his father due to what he was able to read in the investigation file in Nova Scotia and the claims being made, and that the emergency protection order needed to stay in place. I was never so grateful to have someone help us. I had what was called stacked orders. It's very rare. Apparently, it doesn't usually happen. I had a restraining order. I had a new emergency protection order, which they did grant, and it did stay in place for an entire year. I had a parenting order, and I had a copy of his bail conditions, all stating no contact with me. And the emergency protection order now protected my son, who was still 3. Next, I was able to get a parenting order that asked for, or next I was getting a parenting order that asked for supervised visits. Oh my, sorry. My abuser had harmed others and was interested in, and was arrested in March of 2020. When the investigation was complete in Nova Scotia, he was facing 7 charges, or he'll be facing 7 charges in March of 2023 due to COVID restrictions at a trial in regards to historical sexual assault of a minor. Sorry, I'm a little flustered. I just saw the time. The charges included 2 counts of sexual assault, sexual interference, invitation to sexual touching, and 1 count of sexual intercourse with a female under the age of 14 who was not his wife. I know I would not be here today had I not had the help of many people who kept me grounded, checked in with me daily, and who sat with me in court. The process takes a toll on one's mental health. And unfortunately, due to the stress of fight or flight for so long, my body crashed and I was diagnosed with functioning neurological disorder. My symptoms mimic MS and Parkinson's, and I do have trouble sometimes finding words and speaking. I also was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. At one point, I was also contemplating cutting my wrist because I thought of blood draining out of my body was calming in the midst of what was a storm. But I knew those thoughts were wrong and I had to stay strong for my kids. I had a positive experience with the Edmonton police, and I fully believe that it is because I had 2 contacts that were aware of everything that was going on, and they tried to stop my abuser and constantly stayed in contact with me. I had the help of the Edmonton John Howard Society with therapy and having someone sit in family court with me. I also used their program for victims of domestic violence and crime, and they came to court hearings in regards to his trial and charges. I was able to have some help through the Sexual Assault Center of Edmonton, having therapy, amazing lawyers, multiple, through legal aid, and I had my family and friends with me every step of the way. I bypassed the slide quickly, sorry. My abuser was sentenced to 90 days in jail after pleading guilty to criminal harassment and the intimate photos that he had posted, and he had 2 years of probation. So where are we now? My son, who I share with my abuser, has now not seen his dad in almost 4 years. After getting the emergency protection order and changing the parenting order to me having sole decision-making and asking that his father only be allowed supervised visitations, his father abandoned him. My son is happy and thriving though. He does struggle with learning in school and is a bit behind, but he will do just fine with some help. He has started to disclose his own abuse by his father and is going to therapy. Currently, there is a new police file open in regards to his disclosure. We all finally feel safe in our home, and we have 2 little dogs and a bunny to help keep our home full. I have always allowed and encouraged my children to speak their truth because I was not the only one that was stalked and harassed and scared. I was able to write a book about my experience called Escaping My Predator, which includes everything I talked about today and more. I am currently writing a second book, and I'm hoping that my book can help someone else who goes through this. I was hoping it might fill in some of the gaps that are clearly in the system. I wanted to make it easier for the next person by providing them with resources and what it's like going to court and fighting the abuser, sorry. I wanted to give hope. As hard as it is possible to keep yourself safe and your children. I've gone back to school so I can learn more about how to help victims and survivors of domestic violence. I have been accepted into a psychology major and doing sociology. I have become an advocate for those who do not have a voice due to being silenced by their abuser and by courts. I have been working with a few officers in Edmonton on projects that may help victims in the future, and I have started speaking to victims and survivors of domestic violence to help them see that it's possible to come out the other side of this and still be successful and helpful. I am also advocating for change in the courts to have judges trained in family court so that children are not constantly exposed and used as pawns by their abusers after fleeing abuse. It needs to be said, and often, that abuse does not end when we walk out the door. The abuse continues, and more often when there are children shared between the abuser and the victim. These children need to be kept safe from farther harm and abuse. There are many gaps in the system, from the time one files a report with the police, to having someone from victim services call you, to things being missed in protection orders and parenting orders that are made as gray areas and make it hard for the police to make an arrest, such as orders not matching up with police clauses. The wait times for help and therapy are long. This is life or death. We need help as soon as we leave. There are so many emotions, thoughts, lack of sleep, fight or flight, and flashbacks. We barely function. Help needs to be available right away. And I know that can be hard with staffing, but these are just a few of the things as a victim who went through this that I observed. When I got help I needed and the support, I was able to keep going and to keep fighting for my safety and my children. Thank you very much for having me here today to speak with you. I appreciate this opportunity to tell my story. Are there any questions?
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mary, for sharing your experience with us, and very brave of you. We do have some time for questions and answers, and I would encourage anybody to type in the chat box of the video screen that you're watching. The chat box to the right, the moderators don't have access to see, but right in the Zoom link, we would be happy to take any of the questions that you might have before we break for lunch. Mary, one of the questions that I have is, you'd mentioned that you had a resource, a book, and also that you had a number of people helping you through the process. Have you done anything with that in terms of made that available or compiled resources for others who might be able to take advantage of that assistance?
So right now I have a website, and I'm still currently working on that. I'm doing it all myself. There are some resources on there that I was able to use here in Edmonton, but I have also been working on making kind of like a pamphlet or a big booklet that has all the resources here in Edmonton. It's not just like with the John Howard or the Sexual Assault Center of Edmonton here, but it also explains what the differences are between protection orders, and it gives the information of how to obtain one, and about the escaping abuse benefits, and then also gives options for lawyers, so legal aid, and there's other like a student legal aid here as well, so free options for those that don't have the funds to pay for a lawyer. So there is quite a bit of information in there.
Excellent, thank you. And Mary, are we able to access that in our speaker notes section? That's on your website, which we've included for you?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, excellent. Well, I want to share a comment from Ms. Stephanie Bellows. She thanks you so much for sharing your story. She's going through court right now against an abuser, and your story certainly gives her hope that she will overcome it. Thank you for sharing that as well, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Also, Danielle says that she thought she was listening to her own story. Thank you very much for sharing. And so we really do appreciate that, Mary, for your bravery and being willing to come forward. Certainly your strength is a beacon of hope to all of us. We believe fully that you will be able to help so many walking through this journey. And for those of you that are watching, thank you so much for attending and for listening and joining us today. In our exhibit hall, you will find a section for speaker notes and presentations. In there, we do have a link for Miss Mary's book and her website, where you can access the resources that she very, very graciously made available to everybody else. And we look forward to more materials that are coming forward, Mary. At this time, if there are no other questions, we will move into our lunch break. And again, I want to thank you all for listening. We will begin our conference again at 1 p.m. after the lunch break. So I encourage you to come back in. Please also stop by the lobby for up-to-date communications. Also visit our trade show hall. We have an Abuse Hurts booth there where you can learn more about what it is that we do. And our program coordinator, Kaylee, will be there to chat, ask or answer any questions that you might have. So feel free to ask her more questions about what is available, and also gather some great resources. So please, everybody, enjoy your lunch. Thank you once again, Mary, for joining us. And if everybody could come back at 1 p.m. for our next keynote speaker, that would be fantastic. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Erica, you're all done?
Yes, we're all done. We signed off.
Yes, okay. Any questions? No,